Anger is often misunderstood. Many people believe it's an intrinsic part of who they are. I have a short temper, or I've always been like this. But in reality, anger is not a fixed trait. It's a vast biological reflex, a reaction rooted in the evolutionary structure of the brain. Understanding this is the first and most critical step in learning to never get angry or bothered by others. This realization alone can create an enormous shift in how we view ourselves and our reactions. It moves us from a place of identification, I am angry, to a place of observation, my brain is producing a signal of anger. This signal originates in the aura's limbic system, particularly the Alzheimer's amygdala, a deep brain structure involved in threat detection and emotional responses. When you perceive a threat, whether real or imagined, the amygdala lights up and sends a cascade of signals to the rest of the body. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Your breathing becomes shallow. These are physiological signatures of anger, but they're actually part of the broader fight or flight response designed to protect you in moments of danger. The issue is that in modern life, the threats are rarely physical. They're social, psychological. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A co-worker interrupts you. A partner criticizes you. Your brain, however, does not distinguish easily between these different types of threat. The same circuits get activated. This is why we must understand that as anger is not you. It's a reflex. It's a survival response that often misfires in contexts where it's not useful or productive. And because it's a reflex, it can be studied, observed, managed, and ultimately rewired. You don't have to react with anger just because the signal has been generated. The space between stimulus and response, that split second of awareness, is where power lies. It's where you can shift from being reactive to being regulated. This is the power of DAR's self-directed neuroplasticity, the ability to consciously shape how your brain and nervous system respond to the world. One of the most empowering aspects of understanding anger as a reflex is that it opens the door to us. Choice it. If your anger is a signal, not your identity, then you can choose how to respond to that signal. This isn't about suppression. Suppression creates internal pressure, which often leads to explosive outbursts later. Instead, it's about regulation. It's about creating space between the trigger and the reaction and using that space to evaluate, reflect, and redirect. In neuroscience, we call this as top-down control. The process by which the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, exerts control over the limbic system. When you practice emotional regulation techniques, like deep breathing, labeling your emotions, or simply pausing before you respond, you're strengthening the neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Over time, this makes it easier to stay calm under pressure and more difficult to be hijacked by emotional reflexes. Another powerful insight is that emotions are embodied experiences. That means they are felt and stored in the body. The tight chest, clenched jaw, and racing thoughts are not random. They are physical expressions of an internal state. Learning to read and interpret these signals, what's often called interoception, allows you to catch anger early, often before it fully blooms. And once you catch it early, you can interrupt it with tools like a vast physiological sigh, which sends calming signals to the brain and resets your autonomic state. Moreover, when you externalize anger as a reflex instead of identifying with it, it becomes easier to work with. Instead of thinking, I'm a person who gets angry, you begin to see the process. My brain is generating a survival response based on a perceived threat. This shift in language is subtle but powerful. It depersonalizes the emotion and gives you a neutral starting point from which to apply tools and strategies. This doesn't mean anger is always bad. In some contexts, it signals injustice or the need for boundaries. But even then, the key is to always respond to anger, not to be ruled by it. You can use the energy of anger as fuel for assertiveness, clarity, and action, but only when it's channeled through a calm, intentional state. In essence, learning not to get angry or bothered by others starts with this foundational truth: anger is not who you are. It is a biological signal that can be observed, understood, and reprogrammed. When you begin to see it this way, not as a personal flaw, but as a functional response, you reclaim power over your emotional life. You stop being at the mercy of others and start mastering your own internal state, and that is where true freedom begins. Your emotional state acts as a lens through which you interpret the world. When you're calm and regulated, things seem manageable. People appear reasonable. Small annoyances are just that, small. But when your physiological state shifts, when your heart rate is elevated, your breathing shallow, or your stress hormones spiked, your brain begins to interpret neutral or even benign stimuli as threatening. This is the fundamental principle that a state drives perception. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world through the filter of your internal state. This is deeply rooted in neuroscience. The Ozer's interplay between the autonomic nervous system and cognitive processing is powerful. The autonomic nervous system regulates your internal physiological state without your conscious input. It has two primary branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which mobilizes energy and activates fight or flight responses, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which restores, calm, and supports rest and recovery. When you're in a sympathetic, dominant state, your brain shifts into a more defensive, reactive mode. It's primed for danger, even if there is none. In this state, your perceptual bias changes. A comment from a friend that normally wouldn't bother you suddenly feels like an attack. A delay in a message reply feels like rejection. A minor disagreement feels like a betrayal. These are not objective realities. They are emotional interpretations shaped by your state. In fact, when you're physiologically stressed, activity in the Gaussian amygdala increases, and this heightens emotional reactivity and reduces your ability to think rationally. At the same time, activity in the AR's prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking, empathy, and long-term planning, begins to decrease. You're more likely to misread facial expressions, project negative intent onto others, and feel threatened by situations that normally wouldn't register. So if you want to stop getting angry or bothered by others, the solution doesn't start with controlling the external world. It starts with regulating your internal state. You must become aware of the signals your body is sending you. Are your shoulders tense? Is your breathing fast? Is your jaw clenched? These physical cues are your early warning system. They tell you when your state is shifting and your perception is beginning to distort. The good news is you are not powerless in this process. You have tools, simple, science-based tools that can shift your physiological state in real time. Breath work is one of the most effective. Something as simple as a Vazir's physiological sieve, a double inhale followed by a slow exhale, can reduce levels of carbon dioxide in the blood, signal safety to the brain, and return the nervous system to balance. In just seconds, you can reduce your emotional intensity and restore access to your prefrontal cortex, which allows you to make better decisions. As movement is another tool. Even light movement like walking or stretching can metabolize stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline and bring the body back to a state of equilibrium. And over time, lifestyle practices like sleep, nutrition, and exercise build a more resilient baseline. A well-regulated body provides a more accurate and compassionate lens through which to interpret the actions of others. This understanding of how your internal state shapes your perception is not just about managing anger. It's about learning to see reality more clearly. It teaches you to pause and ask yourself, is this situation really as bad as it seems, or is my state exaggerating my perception? That question alone can break the reactive cycle. It allows you to delay your response, reassess the situation, and often realize that the perceived threat isn't a threat at all. Ultimately, when you begin to master your state, you reclaim the clarity that anger often clouds. You realize that you're not reacting to others, you're reacting to how your nervous system interprets them in a given moment. And once you understand that, you can begin to change everything. The ability to deliberately de-escalate your emotional responses is not an innate talent reserved for a few. It is a skill that anyone can cultivate and strengthen through practice. At the core of this ability lies the brain's remarkable capacity for neuroplasticity, the lifelong process by which neural circuits reorganize in response to experience. When it comes to anger and emotional regulation, this means you can actively retrain your brain to respond differently to provocation, stress, and perceived threats. The first step in deliberate de-escalation is to recognize that emotional reactions are not automatic, unchangeable events. While initial impulses, such as the surge of anger triggered by a frustrating event, may arise quickly and without conscious thought, what follows is a moment of choice. This moment, however brief, allows you to engage brain regions involved in executive control, such as the prefrontal cortex, which can downregulate activity in the Zavers and amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center. With repeated practice, this top-down control becomes stronger, quicker, and more habitual. Several practical techniques leverage this neuroplastic capacity. Our mindfulness meditation, for example, encourages non-judgmental awareness of thoughts and emotions as they arise. By observing anger without immediately reacting, you create a mental space where emotional impulses can diminish rather than escalate. Research shows that consistent mindfulness practice increases activity and connectivity in brain regions responsible for self-regulation, making it easier to stay calm when faced with provocation. Breathwork is another powerful tool for de-escalation. Controlled breathing techniques engage the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest and restoration. Techniques such as slow diaphragmatic breathing or the physiological sigh, a double inhale through the nose followed by a prolonged exhale through the mouth, can rapidly reduce sympathetic nervous system arousal. This shifts your nervous system from a fight or flight mode to a calmer state, allowing rational thought to re-enter the picture. Cognitive strategies like Avers reframing also utilize neuroplasticity. Reframing involves consciously altering the interpretation of an event or another person's behavior to reduce emotional charge. Instead of interpreting a harsh comment as a personal attack, you might reframe it as a reflection of that person's stress or misunderstanding. This simple shift activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala activity, which decreases feelings of anger and irritation. Over time, the repeated use of these techniques strengthens the neural circuits underlying emotional regulation. This is key because the brain operates on a use it or lose it principle. Frequent practice enhances connections and efficiency, while lack of practice allows old, reactive pathways to dominate. By deliberately training your mind and body to calm yourself during provocation, you are rewiring your brain to be less reactive and more resilient. The benefits extend beyond just not getting angry. Deliberate de-escalation fosters greater emotional intelligence, better relationships, and improved mental well-being. You become more capable of responding to challenges with clarity rather than impulsivity, turning potentially destructive moments into opportunities for growth and connection. It's important to remember this process is not about perfection or immediate transformation. The brain's plasticity allows for gradual improvement, and setbacks are natural. Each time you notice your emotional state rising and choose a calming strategy instead of reacting, you reinforce your new neural patterns. This incremental progress compounds over days, weeks, and months, leading to profound changes in how you experience and respond to the world. In essence, deliberate emotional de-escalation is a practice of rewiring your brain. It empowers you to break free from automatic anger responses and step into a space of choice, control. This is the scientific foundation of how to remain unbothered by others and maintain calm in the face of provocation, not by suppressing emotions, but by transforming your brain's habitual responses through consistent, intentional practice. Focus is one of the most powerful tools you possess when it comes to managing your emotional responses, especially anger. What you direct your attention toward essentially shapes the strength and duration of your emotional experience. This principle, rooted deeply in neuroscience, reveals that attention is not just a passive process. It is an active creator of your internal state and external reality. When you experience anger or irritation, your brain often fixates on the source of the frustration. You replay the offending words, relive the slight, or obsess over what was said or done. This fixation serves to amplify and sustain the emotional response. In other words, anger grows stronger the more you feed it with your attention. This is because the neural circuits associated with those emotional experiences become more active and interconnected with each repetition. The brain strengthens pathways based on what you focus on, reinforcing habits of thought and feeling. The good news is that attention is always malleable and under your conscious control. You can choose where to place your focus, which means you can intentionally redirect your attention away from triggers that provoke anger and towards stimuli that calm or ground you. For example, focusing on your breath, feeling the sensation of air moving in and out of your body can draw your nervous system out of a reactive state and into a calmer, more regulated mode. This shift interrupts the feedback loop that fuels anger. Beyond the breath, you can use external anchors to guide your focus. Visual objects, such as the colors and textures of your surroundings, or sounds like ambient noise or calming music, can serve as points of attention. Even focusing on a task or something you are grateful for can help shift your brain's activity away from negative spirals. This process of Dasein attention redirection works because of how the brain's networks operate. The S default mode networks, often associated with mind wandering and self-referential thought, tends to amplify negative rumination. Meanwhile, the say attention networks, including areas in the parietal and frontal lobes, allow you to consciously shift your awareness. By engaging these attention networks, you can downregulate activity in emotional centers like the amygdala. Research has shown that the deliberate practice of shifting attention is a key component of many mindfulness-based interventions in cognitive behavioral therapies. These approaches teach you to observe thoughts and feelings without judgment and to choose where your focus lies. Over time, this rewires the brain's circuitry, making it easier to disengage from anger-provoking stimuli and maintain a state of calm. In addition, cultivating a habit of redirecting focus improves your overall emotional resilience. It helps you recognize early warning signs of anger and gives you a tool to intervene before emotions escalate. Instead of getting caught in a cycle of reactive thinking, you build the capacity to pause, choose your focus, and change your emotional trajectory. It's also important to understand that this skill extends beyond just managing anger. Attention shapes your entire experience of life. By training yourself to focus on positive, grounding, or meaningful stimuli, you enrich your emotional life, boost creativity, and improve problem-solving abilities. Your brain becomes better at filtering out distractions and prioritizing what truly matters. The power of focus lies in its simplicity and accessibility. Wherever you are, whatever you're facing, you can practice directing your attention. Whether it's a few deep breaths, observing the details of your environment, or recalling a moment of gratitude, these small acts build your capacity to stay calm and composed. Ultimately, mastering your focus means reclaiming control over your internal narrative. You no longer have to be a passive victim of your emotional impulses. Instead, you become an active participant in shaping how you experience the world. This shift from reactivity to intentionality is the foundation for never being bothered or angered by anyone. It's a practice that not only transforms moments of irritation, but also reshapes your overall relationship with life. The ability to reframe adversity through engagement of the prefrontal cortex is a fundamental skill that can dramatically reduce feelings of anger and distress. At its core, this process involves consciously activating the brain's higher-order cognitive regions to reinterpret situations that initially trigger emotional reactivity. This cognitive reappraisal is supported by decades of neuroscience research demonstrating how the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, planning, and self-control, can exert top-down influence over the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala. When a challenging or frustrating event occurs, the amygdala often responds first, generating a rapid emotional reaction that can include fear, anger, or anxiety. This is an automatic, evolutionarily ancient mechanism designed to protect us from danger. However, the brain's remarkable architecture allows for a second, more deliberate response via the prefrontal cortex. By engaging this area, you recruit cognitive resources that enable you to analyze the situation, consider alternative perspectives, and ultimately choose how to feel and act. One practical way to engage the prefrontal cortex is through AS emotion labeling, the simple act of naming what you are feeling. When you consciously identify your emotional state, I am feeling angry, or I am frustrated, you activate brain regions associated with language and executive function. This labeling process has been shown to reduce activity in the amygdala, effectively lowering the intensity of emotional responses. By putting feelings into words, you create a cognitive distance from the emotion, which allows you to observe it without being overwhelmed. Reframing also involves changing the narrative you tell yourself about a situation or another person's behavior. For example, if someone snaps at you, instead of interpreting it as a personal attack, you might consider that they are under stress, dealing with their own struggles, or simply having a bad day. This shift in interpretation changes your emotional response because you are no longer reacting to a threat, but rather to a more neutral or compassionate understanding. This mental shift is a deliberate act of the prefrontal cortex overriding the amygdala's alarm. Engaging in reframing requires practice and intention. It can be challenging because the brain's default mode is often to react quickly and emotionally to perceived threats. However, with repetition, the neural pathways involved in cognitive reappraisal strengthen. This neuroplastic change means that over time, reframing becomes more automatic and less effortful, allowing you to maintain emotional regulation more consistently. Additionally, reframing connects to broader psychological concepts such as S growth mindset and ES resiliences. When you view adversity as a challenge to learn from rather than an insurmountable obstacle, you engage the prefrontal cortex in planning and problem solving. This perspective not only reduces anger, but also promotes constructive responses and personal growth. Another way to enhance prefrontal engagement is through reflective practices such as journaling, meditation, or talking through emotions with a trusted person. These activities encourage you to slow down, process your experiences consciously, and create new mental frameworks for understanding events. By doing so, you shift from being controlled by your emotions to becoming the author of your emotional experience. Importantly, this process does not deny or invalidate emotions. Instead, it acknowledges their presence while choosing a different response. You respect the signal anger provides, perhaps signaling a boundary has been crossed or an injustice experienced. But you refuse to be overwhelmed by it. You choose to respond with awareness rather than react impulsively. The neurological underpinning of this skill offers a hopeful message: your brain is not fixed. You have the capacity to shape how you think, feel, and respond. By intentionally activating the prefrontal cortex through reframing and labeling, you strengthen the brain's ability to regulate emotions and maintain equilibrium. Ultimately, mastering the art of reframing is about reclaiming agency over your inner life. It transforms anger from a disruptive force into an opportunity for insight, empathy, and growth. By engaging the rational, reflective parts of your brain, you build resilience against being easily bothered or angered by others, fostering a steadier, more peaceful mind. Building a strong and resilient nervous system is foundational to maintaining calm and equanimity in the face of external stressors, including provocations that might otherwise trigger anger. The nervous system functions as the body's command center for managing stress, regulating emotions, and maintaining homeostasis. When it is well regulated and resilient, it can efficiently process and recover from stress, reducing the likelihood that you will become easily agitated or overwhelmed by others. One of the key components of a resilient nervous system is a balanced autonomic nervous system, ANZDIR, which consists of two complementary branches: the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, and the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS. The SNS is responsible for the fight or flight response, mobilizing energy and preparing the body to respond to threats. The PNS, on the other hand, supports rest, recovery, and restoration. A resilient nervous system maintains a dynamic balance between these two systems, activating the sympathetic branch when necessary, but quickly engaging the parasympathetic branch to bring the body back to a state of calm. Chronic stress, poor sleep, inadequate nutrition, and sedentary lifestyles can disrupt this balance, leading to a state of Fowler's sympathetic dominances, where the body remains in a heightened state of arousal. This chronic activation can increase irritability, decrease tolerance for frustration, and impair emotional regulation, making it more likely that you will react with anger or feel easily bothered by others. Therefore, building resilience involves both reducing chronic stressors and actively cultivating practices that enhance parasympathetic tone. Physical movement is a powerful way to regulate the nervous system. Regular exercise, whether it's aerobic activity, strength training, yoga, or even walking, helps metabolize stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, improves mood through the release of endorphins, and supports overall nervous system health. Movement also stimulates the vagus nerve, a major component of the parasympathetic system, enhancing your capacity to enter a calm and restorative state. Sleep is another critical pillar of nervous system resilience. During sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste, consolidates memories, and restores neural function. Poor sleep quality or insufficient sleep impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate the amygdala, leading to heightened emotional reactivity and decreased ability to manage anger. Prioritizing consistent, high-quality sleep is essential for emotional stability. Nutrition plays a supportive but no less important role. A diet rich in whole foods, antioxidants, healthy fats, and essential vitamins and minerals supports brain health and neurotransmitter function. Nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, magnesium, and B vitamins contribute to the synthesis and regulation of neurotransmitters involved in mood and stress resilience. Conversely, excessive consumption of processed foods, sugars, and stimulants can exacerbate nervous system dysregulation. Beyond lifestyle factors, breathing practices and harsh mindfulness techniques are effective tools to strengthen parasympathetic function and improve nervous system resilience. Techniques such as slow, deep breathing or the physiological sigh stimulate the vagus nerve, signaling safety to the brain and reducing sympathetic arousal. Regular mindfulness practice trains the brain to remain present and reduces the tendency to ruminate on negative thoughts or stressors, which otherwise keep the nervous system in a heightened state. Developing a resilient nervous system also involves building emotional and psychological resilience. This includes cultivating supportive social relationships, engaging in meaningful activities, and fostering a sense of purpose. Positive social connections release oxytocin, which promotes parasympathetic activity and reduces stress. Having a purpose or engaging in activities that align with your values provides psychological buffering against stress and frustration. Importantly, resilience is not about avoiding stress altogether. It's about improving your capacity to recover quickly and maintain balance despite challenges. When your nervous system is resilient, you can face provocations or difficult people without becoming overwhelmed or reactive. You experience a baseline of calm that allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. This resilience forms the physiological foundation for never getting angry or bothered by anyone. It creates an internal environment where the signals that typically trigger anger are less likely to escalate unchecked. When the nervous system is well regulated, the brain's higher order control centers can more easily maintain equilibrium, and you are less susceptible to being hijacked by emotional reflexes. Ultimately, investing in nervous system resilience is an act of self-care that pays dividends across all areas of life. It supports mental clarity, emotional stability, and physical health, allowing you to navigate the world with greater ease and less reactivity. By nurturing this foundation, you empower yourself to live with greater peace, compassion, and control, qualities that are essential to maintaining calm regardless of external circumstances or the behavior of others.